Jiang Yuan-king was orphaned from his father at a young age, and his peers alienated him because of this. His childhood was filled with ridicule and contempt from other children. They frequently taunted him for being a fatherless child. Only Lai Yibing stood up to protect him from the bullies. Just like other times when Lai Yibing caught Yuan-king being bullied, he rushed in to fight the troubled kids, shouting, "What are you saying?" He yelled at the children, telling them they didn't understand anything and should stop believing rumors. He then warned them that if they continued to bully Jiang Yuan-king, there would be consequences. And so the two of them, one older and one younger, became like brothers, supporting each other as they grew up. In today's strange dream, Yuan-king saw his brother Lai Yibing turning his back and leaving him behind. Before leaving, he told Yuan-king that if it were him, he could do it. Yuan-king woke up from his dream and reached for the medicine bottle next to his bed. In high school, he had been diagnosed with a strange condition where he constantly recalled memories from the past, including seemingly forgotten trivial information. Yuan-king couldn't control his brain's collection of information from the outside world for analysis. This had accidentally given his brain the ability to control his body to an astonishing degree. The downside was that each time these symptoms appeared, it caused him severe headaches. The hospital couldn't determine the cause of his condition. Fortunately, Yuan-king's mother had found a special imported medicine, which helped control his condition. After taking his medicine, Yuan-king sat motionless on his bed until he heard his grandmother calling him for breakfast. Yuan-king acknowledged her and sighed, looking at the medicine bottle. He noticed that recently the medicine's effectiveness had been diminishing, or perhaps his tolerance was increasing. As he left his room, his younger aunt suggested taking him shopping for clothes. Yuan-king absent-mindedly agreed while receiving a delivered package, then suddenly exclaimed, "Danger." Immediately, his grandmother slapped him and shouted that if he dared to go with his aunt, she would break his legs. Yuan-king protested that it wasn't fair. His aunt had invited him, so why threaten to break his legs? His grandmother's sharp eyes flashed as she declared that at her age she didn't mince words when she said something had to be done. His aunt laughingly put her arm around him, saying that Yuan-king was over 20 years old now and should think about romance. He needed to be a bit more presentable to get a girlfriend. He sighed, not daring to speak up, thinking his aunt was using him as a target again. The old woman suddenly shouted that the two of them were plotting something and that she knew exactly what they were up to. Today, Xiao Jiang absolutely had to go on a blind date. If she continued refusing to get married, there would be no one to take care of her in old age. Jiang disagreed, saying if her mother had free time, she should go manage her older brother instead. Moreover, all the blind dates her mother had arranged for her were with strange-looking men, which made her feel helpless. Yuan-king took the opportunity to escape and open the package while the two older women continued their conversation. Inside the package, he found a black card with a circle in the middle that felt quite nice. The high-quality card looked like something from an exclusive club. He casually put it in his pocket and continued checking the package. Inside was a letter from Lai Yibing saying he had found something very interesting. He thought it could change their lives, but his abilities were limited and he couldn't control it. At the end of the letter, Lai Yibing wrote that if it were Yuan-king, it would be a problem, and this was his gift to him. Yuan-king thought that it had been a long time since they'd been in contact, and he hadn't expected Bing to suddenly send him something so intriguing. Yuan-king took out his phone and called Lai Yibing. As soon as the other person picked up, Yuan-king laughed and said that his friend's judgment was spot on, but to his surprise, it was Mr. Lai, Bing's father, who answered. Through the phone came a heavy voice informing him that Lai Yibing had disappeared. The old man continued that his son had been missing since yesterday, and he and Zhao had received a notification from the school and immediately went there. Yuan-king asked in panic how he could have disappeared and whether Mr. Lai had reported it to the police. Mr. Lai hesitantly explained that his son's disappearance was quite strange. Lai Yibing had vanished while in his dormitory. Investigators had retrieved surveillance footage from the dormitory hallway and discovered that he had never left the building. His roommates also confirmed that he hadn't left the dormitory the day before, but when they turned around, Lai Yibing was nowhere to be found. Yuan-king thought to himself that disappearing like this was impossible. Even a 3-year-old wouldn't believe it. He whispered that this couldn't be happening, not ruling out the possibility that Bing might have offended someone and been kidnapped. Mr. Lai anxiously said that the school administration and police had told the parents to go home and wait for news, and they hadn't slept all night. Yuan-king consoled Mr. Lai, telling him to stay calm first. His grandfather and cousin worked at the police department, and he promised to ask them how to handle this situation. After hanging up, information about Lai Yibing's disappearance kept flashing in his mind. Bing had disappeared yesterday, had never left the dormitory, and wasn't caught on camera. Meanwhile, he had sent Yuan-king a package with the black card. Yuan-king reached into his pocket only to panic when he realized the black card had vanished without a trace. He kept analyzing the black card in Jiangnam province, causing his head to feel like it was exploding, triggering another chronic pain attack. After sending him the light card, Lai Yibing had disappeared. What worried Yuan-king more was that the strange black card was no ordinary item. The more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable Yuan King's head became with collected information continuously appearing in his mind. He couldn't understand why his friend had chosen to send him the package instead of going to the police. Yuan King tried to reason whether it was because the Jiangnam police weren't trustworthy, or was it because Bing trusted that with Yuan King's cousin and grandfather being police officers, no one could harm him. His mind slowly replayed memories with Lai Bing. How Bing had said, "With me here, no one can bully you." His instructions that no matter what, Yuan King had to find ways to protect himself, and his farewell when he left for Jiangnan University. Now Bing was missing, and the last person he chose to trust was Yuan King. Yuan King's head was drenched in cold sweat, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He wiped his face when he heard his grandmother calling from outside that investigators from the Kangyang District Police Department were looking for him. Yuan King was confused about why they would come for him, and why they were from the same department where his cousin worked. How could there be such a coincidence? He heard his grandmother loudly saying outside that her grandson couldn't possibly have committed any crime. She asked what they wanted to investigate, then called for Yuan King to come out. The police reassured her that they just had some general questions. When she saw Yuan King, his grandmother said she had checked their IDs and they were indeed from the Kangyang District Police Department. She warned her grandson not to do anything bad behind her back. Yuan King helplessly thought that if he couldn't do anything bad in front of her, how could he do it behind her back? When Yuan King heard Kangyang District Police Department again, he confirmed they were from the same department as his cousin. Although he didn't understand what was happening, he politely invited them inside to talk. He introduced himself as Yuan King and asked why they were looking for him. Lai Dongzi sympathetically said they were sorry to bother him and wanted to know if he knew Lai Bing. Yuan King pretended to be confused and replied that Bing was his childhood friend, asking if something had happened to him. Yuan King led them into the house while thinking to himself that his cousin was the leader of Team 2 in Kangyang. For 3 investigators to show up at his door today, they must be fully aware of his family background. Moreover, shouldn't they have notified him beforehand when visiting a colleague's family member? Lai Dongzi summarized the situation. Lai Bing had disappeared. The Provincial Police Bureau of Jiangnam had contacted them, saying that Lai Bing had sent Yuan King a package on the morning before his disappearance. Yuan King feigned shock, shouting, "Missing? How is that possible?" Wang Qin spoke up, reminding him to simply answer yes or no. Guanya laughed, telling Wang Qin not to frighten the student like that, to relax as this was just a conversation. Yuan King answered that he had received the package, but it didn't indicate who it was from, so he was still wondering about its sender. Lai Dongzi continued questioning, asking what was inside the package. Yuan King answered in order, "Nothing. It was empty." He added that there was an air cushion, but nothing else. Yuan King thought that since the black card had vanished, it could be considered as nothing, so technically, he wasn't lying. Since he was the last person to have contact with Lai Bing, the investigators wanted to check his room computer and mobile phone. Lai Dongzi emphasized that it wasn't mandatory, but it would be better if he didn't refuse. Yuan King agreed, saying that to prove his innocence, it was fine. Guan Ye took on this task, smiling brightly and asking Yuan King to cooperate by handing over his phone. With his phone falling into a stranger's hands, he hesitated, wanting to say something. Guan Ye laughed loudly, saying they were only investigating Lai Bing's case and didn't care about anything else. During the idle time, Yuan King asked a few more questions about Lai Bing's disappearance. He thought that if he didn't ask any questions, it would look suspicious. Lai Dongzi explained that Lai Bing had disappeared from the dormitory and surveillance cameras in the hallway didn't record him leaving. According to information provided by a roommate, he woke up that night to go to the bathroom and saw Lai Bing sleeping on his bed. However, afterwards, he was nowhere to be seen. After 24 hours of no contact, the advisor notified the school, and the school immediately reported it to the police. Lai Dongzi advised that if he wanted to know more details, he could call the local police station. The information provided to Yuan King was nothing new, no different from what Mr. Lai had said. It seemed the local police had made no progress. Yuan King didn't rule out the possibility that this person didn't want to tell him. Lai Dongzi instructed him to immediately report any clues and absolutely not conceal anything. His complex gaze fell on Yuan King as he emphasized that if not, the next person to disappear would certainly be him. Yuan King wondered what he meant by that, whether he was threatening him. But outwardly, he thanked him for the reminder. Guan Ye returned his phone, laughing loudly that she had finished checking. Yuan King looked at her expression with a dark face, sure that she had seen something. After completing the investigation before leaving, Lai Dongzi said that if there was anything or if he remembered anything, he could contact him anytime. He didn't forget to give his business card to Yuan King. Yuan King and his grandmother saw them to the door, asking them to inform the two of them if they had any information about Lai Bing. His grandmother worriedly asked why he would suddenly disappear when everything was fine. The old woman sighed and said she would arrange to visit Lai Bing's mother. Yuan King, feeling a headache coming on, asked his grandmother's permission to go back to his room to rest. He suggested that when his grandfather returned, she should tell him about this and ask him to contact Mr. Lei. After leaving Yuan King's house, Lai Dongzhi immediately asked Guan Ye if she had gathered anything new. She replied affirmatively, then seriously reported that there were many hidden folders. The young man was obsessed with sister figures and his study materials were full of them. Additionally, he had extensive social connections and participated in various teams, but was only active in gaming groups. In his room, there were no entertainment items other than gaming consoles. She concluded that this young man had a rather introverted personality. Lai Dongzhi held his forehead, asking if this was the big discovery she was talking about. He reminded her that he had told her countless times not to play childish tricks, not to say vulgar things anymore, that this habit of hers was very bad and not polite at all. Guan Yuan flipped her hair and laughed loudly, telling him not to be so boring, that appropriate jokes only made the atmosphere more lively. She restated that there was indeed no useful information on the computer and mobile phone, but Lai Yibing's letter was placed under a flower pot. Therefore, it could be concluded that Lai Yibing had indeed sent him something. If her guess wasn't wrong, it was a character card, but she wasn't sure what profession it was for. Lai Dongzhi sighed and asked her to stop by again tomorrow if Yuan King hadn't disappeared by then. Yuan King locked himself in his room, analyzing the information related to Lai Yibing. He hypothesized that if his disappearance was caused by humans, then the target of those people was the black card. This implied that the police might not be the only ones suspecting that he had the black card, and it couldn't be ruled out that Lai Yibing had been approached by a third party. As for why he didn't actively contact the police, perhaps it was because he didn't trust the police department. Moreover, until now, Yuan King wasn't sure whether the three eccentric police officers who had just visited were friends or foes. Yuan King chose the best course of action, to tell his cousin everything, but he couldn't contact him at the moment. Even if he could, he wouldn't know how to explain to his cousin about the sudden disappearance of the black card. Yuan King shouted loudly, wondering what to do. As the more he thought about it, the more confused he became. Hearing his shout, Aunt Jiang from outside yelled that he wasn't replying to her messages or answering her calls, and now he was shouting about what? She reminded him that avoiding problems wouldn't solve them. When no one appeared, Jiang continued to speak loudly, asking if he wasn't listening to her anymore, reminding him that she usually gave him gifts. A moment later, she lowered her voice and called to Yuan King, saying his aunt was being bullied, asking if he was going to do anything about it. Yuan King stood up, intending to go outside to see what was happening, but his head suddenly experienced strange pains. Just then, his grandmother came out from the kitchen and intervened, telling Jiang that he had a headache this afternoon and went to bed early, so she shouldn't disturb him. The old woman asked her daughter to come over and tell her about today's blind date prospect, whether she liked him or not. Jiang ducked her head and replied that he was quite good, a salary of 1 million, owned a house and car, but she didn't like people who earned too much money. Yuan King ignored the noise outside and focused on his reflection in the glass. A large black mark had appeared on his forehead. He moved closer to look at the mark, wondering what it was. Yuan King slowed down and asked himself if this wasn't the black moon shape from the card. He looked at the progress bar running, not knowing what would happen when it reached 100. Yuan King realized that the black card hadn't disappeared at all. Instead, it penetrated into his body in a way he couldn't understand, then transformed into a mark on his forehead. According to Lai Yibing, this could change his life, so his previous guesses were correct. Someone was eyeing this card, and because his friend didn't want those people to find it, he had sent it to Yuan King and then disappeared. The progress bar reached 99, and before Yuan King's eyes appeared a notification screen announcing that the character card had been restarted. Next came a character attributes panel with the profession Night Wanderer God, along with some statistics that didn't have points yet. The morality column was at 60, which was the initial value. Below was a note warning never to let morality points drop below 60, urging to be a good person. Yuan King whispered that this was exactly like the system described in web novels. The system asked Yuan King to name his character. He thought dejectedly that its intelligence was too low to communicate properly. For a moment, he thought he had gotten some powerful golden finger. Since he couldn't use his real-life name, he chose a grand-sounding name, Yuan Shu Tianzun. After confirming the name, the system announced a countdown to open the spirit realm. A great light shone down, continuing to display the announcement that the spirit realm map startup was complete, welcoming him to the Night Wanderer God's Yuling Tunnel. The first main mission was to survive for 3 hours, and the second mission was to explore the spirit realm. Note that items unrelated to the spirit realm could not be brought along. Yuan King was taken to a dark tunnel, and he didn't know where it was. The system began to introduce the spirit realm, asking Yuan King if he knew about the Yuling Tunnel, one of the 10 strange stories that had ever appeared. The Yuling Tunnel was built at the end of the last century. During construction, a construction team entered the tunnel on a rainy night to dig earth and simply vanished inside, never to be seen again. The police and military searched for many days and found one of the workers who had participated in the excavation that night on the mountain, but the others were nowhere to be seen. Although that person survived, he was affected by something inexplicable and became mentally deranged. No matter how he was questioned, he only repeated one phrase, "Don't go forward," and temple. Yuan Qing looked around, wondering if this was really the bizarre tunnel from the story. It was so quiet that it gave people a feeling of fear. He felt that everything was too crazy, happening to him just like that. Then Yuan Qing made another observation that this was not the Yuling tunnel mentioned in the 10 bizarre stories. A few days ago, when going back to Jieba, he'd have passed by that tunnel, and the real Yuling didn't look like the surroundings, nor was it this old. Yuan Qing's whole body trembled uncontrollably. He no longer doubted that this was a supernatural phenomenon. He had been drawn into a strange story and had to complete missions assigned by some force. That voice gave him 2 missions again: survive for 3 hours and explore the spirit realm, difficulty level S, single-player death mode. Yuan Qing reasoned that surviving for 3 hours meant there was an extremely great danger. As for exploring the spirit realm, he wasn't sure if it meant exploring this tunnel. That is, this tunnel was dangerous too. The final consolation was that this was a mission, so after the mission there would certainly be a reward. Yuan Qing continuously analyzed with his mind that according to the attribute panel earlier, his profession was Night Wanderer God. His level was 0, not 1, which meant that becoming a Night Wanderer God was one of the rewards. But what a Night Wanderer God was, he didn't know. Yuan Qing could only conclude that Lai Yubing was right. This card could change destiny, but he had overlooked the second half of what his friend had said. This thing was difficult to control because of its level of danger. And there was that death mode, which didn't sound good at all. As Yuan Qing stood long enough, quite a few dried corpses in the appearance of construction workers approached. He frantically looked for a way to run outside, but strangely, those people didn't chase after him. Until he observed his surroundings clearly, he discovered that he was surrounded. But the construction workers didn't attack him. Instead, they used their hands to point in one direction. Deep in the dark night, Yuan Qing saw the silhouette of a temple. Yuan Qing followed the direction the crowd pointed to escape from the tunnel. In his mind, he kept thinking about the reminder clearly stating that this was a single-player spirit realm with death mode, so it would be logical for the miners to chase and attack him. Strangely, they let him go and moreover pointed out the way. Yuan Qing couldn't figure out what to do. Difficulty level S, explore the spirit realm, then survive for 3 hours. If he hid in the tunnel without moving, it was very likely that the dried corpses would go berserk and attack him, so he decided to run outside first. As for the direction they pointed, Yuan Qing wasn't sure if they wanted him to move to the mission location or if it was another trap. Regardless of the reason, Yuan Qing still decided that he must first avoid these dried corpses. The moonlight illuminated the path full of trees, and Yuan Qing ran along the trail. He felt that everything was too quiet. Normally, at this season, it would be impossible not to hear insects on the mountain. His final destination was an abandoned temple, where everything inside was rotting and had an old musty smell. When he was calmer, Yuan Qing remembered the miner's warning not to enter the temple. According to the reminder from that strange voice, he shouldn't proceed into the temple, but he had already gone through the entire tunnel. That meant that what he needed to explore was this very ruined temple. Yuan Qing couldn't understand whether the actions of the miners inside the tunnel meant they wanted him to enter the temple or not. Yuan Qing held his forehead and muttered, "Not good, extremely not good." The main missions were 2 things that seemed independent of each other, but they were connected. What he needed to do now was to use 3 hours to explore this ruined temple and ensure his survival. If he moved forward, he might die, but turning back would definitely lead to death. Yuan Qing shouted Lai Yubing's name, saying that the opportunity he gave was one that could cost him his life. Back to reality, one side reminded him not to enter the temple, while the other side assigned him the task of searching for this place. Finally, Yuan Qing decided to go inside. Without entering the tiger's den, how could he catch the tiger? The door was pushed open and the lights inside the temple were glowing. From the sound coming from behind, Yuan Qing felt that someone was following him. Looking at the bushes behind, he didn't see anything and wondered if he had misheard. Normally, the first step to seeing ghosts was hearing hallucinations. Yuan Qing's whole body froze as he thought to himself that this was too eerie. Just as he entered the temple, he saw something not too clean. Yuan Qing's footsteps faltered, not knowing whether to continue inside. Having come this far, he couldn't wait any longer, and gathering all of his courage, he ran straight into the temple at the fastest speed. In his heart, he kept praying, "Big brother, if there really are ghosts, please remember kindness with kindness and enmity with enmity." Sitting under the bright light, Yuan Qing could finally sigh with relief. The footsteps outside had also disappeared. He sighed, closed his eyes to rest, thinking that it should be temporarily safe now. In the center of the temple stood a statue of a goddess. Yuan Qing felt as if she was staring at him. On both sides of the goddess were statues of 2 maidservants. As he approached to look, the feeling the statue gave off seemed even more imposing. Yuan Qing stood there observing the statue for a long time. He saw that the goddess seemed to be holding something in her hand. unclear whether this was any clue. Yuan King went to a stele not far from the statue, wanting to find more clues, thinking that it might contain information about the temple. Clearly engraved on the stele was a long line of information. This mountain was called Sandao Shan. The deity worshipped inside the temple was Sandao Shan goddess. As for the goddess, she was a prominent figure from the beginning of the Ming dynasty. In the prefecture, Sandao Shan excelled, was skilled in spells, proficient in alchemy, could call for rain and wind, and was called a deity by the common people. Yuan King thought that if this was a temple from the Ming dynasty, then it was 5,600 years old. This temple was clearly an abandoned one, but the incense and candles here were all lit. You couldn't find the answer to who lit them, only getting a spine-chilling feeling. The feeling became even more horrifying when he found a dried corpse beneath a lit candle belonging to the construction team. Yuan King was curious whether this so-called spirit realm was actually based on a strange story, or if it had existed from the beginning. Yuan King reasoned that if this place had existed early on, it meant that the construction group and he accidentally came here and then were led into an urban legend. Regardless of whether the spirit realm came first or not, his situation was extremely dangerous. If he wanted to survive, he needed more clues. Yuan King cursed twice, then risked going to the side of the dried corpse to find clues. From his initial observation, this person had broken several sternum and rib bones, and there were some small cracks on the right shoulder, but nothing serious. Yuan King noticed that something was hidden in the chest pocket. Taking it out, it was a charm and a notebook. The notebook was nothing less than a diary recording a story from 100 years ago. The first page contained content about another senior brother who disappeared last night. The third fellow disciple in the temple to mysteriously vanish. There might be a ghost at Sandao Shan, a demon with profound Taoist skills. Every night, it came to the temple to catch people to eat. Everyone in the sect went to the master to ask him about how to handle it. The master didn't believe it, dismissing that with all his disciples full of cultivation, how could any demon dare to come here to feed? The master asked the disciples to hide it from the visitors for fear of affecting the temple's incense offerings. The recorder questioned that the master must know something. Actually, for ghosts and demons, spell talismans and spirit swapping were enough to deal with them, without needing to ask the master for help. But he had a bad feeling. Recently, every day a senior brother went missing. The last resort was to go find the eldest senior brother to talk about this. 3 days passed and 3 more people disappeared. The eldest senior brother, and he still couldn't find any clues. Night fell, and a silence enveloped everything. The recorder's bad feeling grew heavier. He sensed that the eldest senior brother had been very strange all day. He seemed to have discovered something. He was very angry, but didn't tell anyone, and his temper wasn't good, so the recorder planned to ask him the next day. The next morning, the eldest senior brother had also disappeared, and he couldn't bear it anymore. The master only instructed him that when the sun set, he should come to his room, and there would be an answer to all the secrets. A secret related to the rise and fall of 1,000 years later. So he spent the whole day in his room waiting for the sun to go down the mountain. Since people started disappearing, he had never hoped for night to come as quickly as now. The record stopped here. Yuan King didn't understand why it ended here. He thought that for the construction team's predecessor to put this paper in his pocket, it must be an important clue. The cause of the temple's decline was still unclear. Yuan King wondered if investigating in this direction would allow him to complete the mission or not. Thinking of the difficulties ahead, Yuan King became confused. Had anyone really gotten out of here? He had found quite a bit of information about the temple's owner. If he wanted to investigate the temple, he would certainly have to go outside, but doing so would mean facing the dangers in the temple. Yuan King remembered that in the story of the Yuling Tunnel, there was one lucky worker who survived. He wanted to follow his path, thinking that perhaps he might find a way to survive. Yuan King stepped to the door, not hearing any sound outside, hesitating to step out. He could sense an unusual feeling of danger outside, but staying here and waiting for time to pass wasn't the right choice either. Yuan King quietly walked around the temple. The night seemed pitch black with only the moonlight shining down. After walking a few steps, he saw another dried corpse from the construction team. From the tunnel to here, everywhere along the way had people from the construction team. Yuan King forgot his fear and looked at them with sympathy. These people had suffered many terrible wounds before dying in a very miserable way. However, unlike other corpses, this person's shoulder bones were still intact and had no cracks. While he was focusing on examining, a mournful voice rang out, calling for help. Yuan King cursed loudly, not knowing what it was, but without seeing it, he already sensed danger. He wanted to cry out loudly, cursing, "Don't call for help anymore. I'm the one who needs to be saved here." Yuan King could hear more clearly that there was indeed someone calling for help. He clenched his fists, thinking to himself that if he had the chance to escape from here, he would go report Lai Yibing's misdeeds to Uncle Lei. Yuan King went around in a large circle, finding complete skeletons everywhere. Only the corpses inside the house and the main hall had broken shoulder bones. He wondered if this was a coincidence. At the next dried corpse, he found a spell talisman and a bronze mirror. The system notified Yuan King that he had just discovered a spirit realm item, its name being a corpse-controlling talisman with the function of controlling corpses, the nemesis of all yin objects in corpse form. When used, it would be pasted on the forehead of the yin object to seal it, and it could only be used once. There were no clues on the bronze mirror or ancient books, only the yellow talisman paper had a special reminder. Yuan King determined that this must be an important item. Yuan King once again looked at the book he had just found, wanting to know what was written inside. It was another type of diary that he had read inside the temple. After entering Sando Shan Temple for 2.5 years, he learned how to write and read books. The young man was happy because he heard the eldest senior brother say that after transcending wandering souls, he could officially join the sect. Cultivating the moon absorption soul-nurturing technique was the entrance cultivation method to become a night wanderer god. This young man was very understanding when he thought that the master, being the strongest among the night wanderer gods of the prefecture, couldn't help but come down the mountain to transcend wandering souls. Otherwise, the war would not end. Yin disasters kept rising continuously, and at that time, the common people would become increasingly anxious. Yuan King thought that this writing style was no different from a diary. These records were about cultivation practices and life experiences in the temple. Yuan King gradually felt the heaviness on his shoulder, guessing that the recording period fell into the stage of the Still Disaster campaign. But this night wanderer god didn't seem to have actually occurred in history. Another page continued. At the sunset and finally it was dark, hearing a knock on the door, the young man excitedly went to open it. The person standing outside the door wasn't the master but the senior brother who had disappeared the previous night. The eldest senior brother, missing for a day and a night, had returned, but he didn't feel happy because his brother was already dead, and what returned was just a corpse. His brother's chest was full of blood, as if someone had taken out his heart. The eldest senior brother looked straight into the young man's eyes and said, "Don't trust the master." The next content of the notebook had been torn out. Yuan King frowned, not understanding what "don't trust the master" meant. He had again felt his whole body getting goosebumps. This place was indeed not a place to stay long. Out of curiosity, he raised the mirror he had just picked up to look, seeing a ghost figure standing behind him, which made Yuan King scream out loud. He was about to paste the yellow paper onto the ghost while reciting all kinds of prayers for all things to go well, for the years to be the same as ever, for the green mountains to never age, for rivers to flow long. Yuan King knelt on the ground, repeatedly saying he was wrong, really wrong. Then, out of curiosity, he used the mirror to look again to see if the yellow talisman had worked. The ghost was still clinging to his neck, continuously sucking his yang energy. This thing wasn't originally a yin object in corpse form, so the yellow talisman had no effect. Yuan King cried and his shoulders became increasingly painful. He wondered what had given him the courage to leave the main hall and explore outside. 2 more dried corpses floated over to welcome a brother joining the club. The remaining one laughed loudly, commenting that today's young people like to commit suicide too much, and it really wasn't painful. Yuan King wanted to kneel and beg. The first wave wasn't over, and the next one had already arrived. The footsteps chasing him before he entered the main hall again pursued him. He helplessly thought that ghosts don't press on bodies. If they killed him, he became a ghost. The ones who would be embarrassed should be them. The sound kept getting closer until a pair of red shoes appeared. Yuan King looked at those shoes, petrified, not knowing how to act anymore. A Ming Dynasty mountain temple combined with Western-style red dance shoes, nothing could be more bizarre. Everything around attacked at once, and Yuan King wondered if he could still save himself. The pain on his shoulder increased incessantly, forcing him to use the mirror again, seeing that his shoulder was about to tear apart. Yuan King instinctively ran toward the light coming from inside the main hall. The vengeful spirit on his back grew heavier and heavier. By the time he reached the temple steps, he was almost crawling on the ground. He had never experienced a journey that took only a minute yet felt so far. Yuan King arrived and collapsed on the floor, and the strange, vengeful spirit gradually dissipated. He had guessed correctly. The main hall was a safe place, and the most noticeable evidence was that the pain in his shoulder had slowly disappeared. Yuan King thought about the situation. Either the red shoes or the vengeful spirit on his shoulder, he could escape from one of them and safely return to the hall. But if both came at once, he feared he would have to remain here forever. Yuan King tiptoed to close the door, thinking to himself that the first rule in horror games is to close the door. The most terrifying and bizarre origin of this ancient temple was certainly not just the vengeful spirits and the red dancing shoes, but the banyan tree in the backyard. It didn't look like a normal tree at all. Yuan King planned to prepare himself mentally before going outside again. Before he could finish preparing, the system displayed a notification that the first mission to survive for 3 hours had been completed. The second mission to explore the spirit realm was 20% complete. The system congratulated the player on completing the mission. Yuan King looked at the notification in confusion, so the first mission was completed. The item received after completing the mission was a corpse-controlling talisman, and experience points increased by 15%. Finally, there was a notification of 36 hours of rest until the next opening. Yuan Qing was immediately returned to his room. Seeing his familiar bed, Yuan Qing lay down and sighed with relief. He had finally returned to the human world alive. Even the air tasted sweet to him. A moment later, Yuan Qing discovered that the corpse-controlling talisman in his hand was gone. Immediately, a notification panel appeared showing him about the item. He discovered that the rule was simple. Just thinking about taking out an item would automatically open the inventory. This function became his instinct. He didn't need to learn how to open it, but naturally knew how to access items. Yuan Qing remarked that it was just like a game. Currently, his level on the notification panel was still 0, meaning he hadn't completely become a night wanderer god yet. Yuan Qing picked up his phone, wanting to inform his cousin about this. Suddenly, he remembered what Lai Dongzi had said. If he had any clues, he must report them, and must absolutely not hide anything. Yuan Qing thought that if he reported this supernatural event to a regular investigator at the police station, they would think he was sleepwalking or had mental problems. Lai Yibing's disappearance might be related to the spirit realm. Moreover, Lai Dongzi had said that his body would also disappear. Yuan Qing reconsidered that he might be implying that Yuan Qing would enter the spirit realm, not ruling out the possibility that the 3 people were special agents who dealt with such cases. Without thinking further, Yuan Qing found Lai Dongzi's business card and called him. When the other party learned the caller was Yuan Qing, he wasn't too surprised and kindly asked if he had come out of the spirit realm. Yuan Qing whispered, "You indeed knew." He only heard congratulations from the other end of the line. "College student, congratulations on becoming a spirit realm practitioner." Lai Dongzi explained further that this was what people like them were called, and he was also a spirit realm practitioner. Between the two of them, there was still a difference. He was official, while Yuan Qing was just a probationer. Hearing Yuan Qing ask what a spirit realm was, Lai Dongzi said he couldn't tell him in detail right now. He only asked Yuan Qing to make a choice. The government had 2 official attitudes toward a spirit realm practitioner. The first would be to recruit and nurture, and the second choice would be to monitor and control. Lai Dongzi emphasized that the first option was to join him, and Yuan Qing would become a government spirit realm practitioner. The second option would be to become an independent cultivator, and he would only need to report back to Lai Dongzi. If he promised not to use his abilities to harm others or break the law, then they wouldn't care. And of course, he wouldn't receive any subsidies from the government. Yuan Qing firmly declared that he was ready to join the organization, to dedicate his life for the country and the people. Lai Dongzi praised him, saying no wonder he came from a family of law enforcement, having such consciousness. He told Yuan Qing to sleep first, and at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning he would come to pick him up. Yuan Qing was a bit surprised and asked, "Tomorrow? Why not now?" He helplessly replied, "What else could we do? Even if you want to dedicate your enthusiasm to the country, you still have to wait until the organization's working hours." Before hanging up, Yuan Qing apologized for hiding Lai Yibing's black card from everyone. Lai Dongzi, on the contrary, praised him for being cautious. However, all night long, Yuan Qing couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the spirits clinging to him. His grandmother concernedly asked why he was up so early today. An Jiang laughed loudly, looking at Yuan Qing, as if he were someone who had indulged excessively in bad behavior. She then wanted to inspect his room herself. Yuan Qing, too tired to refuse, just asked his aunt to remember to check under the bed for anything. Jiang's voice echoed from the room, assuring him that she would check everything. Yuan Qing ignored his younger aunt and went to sit beside his grandfather, asking about the Yuling Tunnel. He remembered that when the Yuling Tunnel construction team disappeared, the police bureau had also organized a team to search for them, and his grandfather was part of that team. Hearing the question, the old man looked away from the TV and replied that it was all in the past, so why ask about it now? Yuan Qing made up that he had read about this information online yesterday, so he wanted to ask his grandfather about what happened to the worker who returned. The old man answered that he didn't remember. It had been a very long time. Yuan Qing continued, saying he read online that this case had caused a great stir in the police force that year, and the police chief had personally come down to direct the operation to calm public opinion. His grandmother interrupted, asking if he had eaten breakfast yet and telling him to come eat. She told him that if her memory served her right, the found worker disappeared not long after as well. Saying this, she turned to yell at the old man, asking if he was too old and suffering from amnesia, as this was what he had told them himself. The old man refuted, saying to believe in science and not listen to rumors. He complained that the older she got, the more she enjoyed nonsensical things. Yuan Qing rubbed his head, thinking about the disappearance again. That meant the only survivor had entered the spirit realm again after 36 hours, but this time he wasn't lucky enough to escape from it. The mortality rate at the temple was extremely high, and the second main mission would be even more dangerous. Yuan Qing thought that if he wanted to survive, relying on the government was the right decision. After eating a bit of the food his grandmother made, Yuan Qing asked permission to go outside. The old woman called out loudly for him to finish eating first. Yuan King refused, his mouth still stuffed with a steamed bun, saying there was no time. Downstairs, Lai Dongzhe was already waiting for him. Seeing him, he called him into the car. Holding a cup of liquor, he asked Yuan King what he wanted to drink. Without thinking, Yuan King immediately said, "Coca." Lai Dongzhe frowned and replied that in that case, he could go to the supermarket to buy it. He announced that he would take him to complete the formalities and then take the opportunity to train him. First, he introduced himself a bit. Lai Dongzhe was a level 3 Spirit Realm practitioner and the team leader of Team 2 in Kangyang District, with the profession of a scout. He added that they would be colleagues in the future. The Spirit Realm is a natural ability that current science still cannot explain. Although they have tried to analyze and understand it, they absolutely cannot comprehend it. The Spirit Realm exists in reality but is separate from reality. Only chosen people can enter the Spirit Realm, and the method of selection is the card. It is called a roll card. Those who receive a roll card will begin their trial mission. After passing the trial, they can perform a corresponding profession, possessing the skills and characteristics of that profession. The mechanism for selecting professions in the Spirit Realm has not yet been discovered, and the method of receiving character cards is not fixed either. Sometimes it will directly appear in the body of the chosen person. Sometimes it's found on the roadside or accidentally clicked on some link. Completing the trial mission is just the beginning. Spirit Realm practitioners who want to level up and become stronger need to continuously accept missions from the Spirit Realm. Lai Dongzhi told Yuan King not to worry too much. The frequency of mission appearances wasn't very high. Moreover, not all contexts in the Spirit Realm were life-threatening. On the contrary, some Spirit Realms were very interesting. Lai Dongzhi used himself as an example, a level 3 scout who had been through it for 2 years. He calmly said that every 3 months he entered the Spirit Realm alone and almost died inside. There were other times when he would enter the Spirit Realm with many people. Lai Dongzhi thought this would be safer and more interesting. He laughed loudly, continuing that to have superpowers, one had to pay an equivalent price. Yuan King replied that it sounded like a game dungeon. Lai Dongzhi was pleased, saying he especially liked talking to young people because they had strong comprehension abilities and were ready to learn new things. Lai Dongzhi continued that single-mode Spirit Realm dungeons were the most dangerous, with the highest mortality rate. Multiplayer mode was better, and there were death modes and punishment modes. However, the punishment mode only deducted a certain amount of experience points. Hearing this, Yuan King asked why single mode had the highest mortality rate. Lai Dongzhi answered that in multiplayer Spirit Realm mode, you would meet other Spirit Realm practitioners of different professions, but in single mode, it was the Spirit Realm of your own profession. Taking scouts as an example, the innate abilities of the profession in the superhuman realm were observation, tracking, and analysis. Therefore, the 3 types of single-mode Spirit Realms he encountered were playing the role of a detective to solve cases, chasing criminals in the forest, and hunting each other and surviving in the wilderness. Additionally, the Spirit Realm dungeons for each profession at the superhuman stage and the sage stage would be different. Yuan King connected this with his Night Wanderer God mode, so entering a single-mode dungeon would be paranormal. Yuan King then asked Lai Dongzhi if Lai Yibing had also entered the Spirit Realm. He pondered for a moment, then said that officials from the City Police Bureau had determined that Lai Yibing had died inside the Spirit Realm. This was because the time was too long. Normal Spirit Realm dungeons, at least at the superhuman realm, would last a few hours at most, or 1 or 2 days at the longest. But Lai Yibing, as of today, had been missing for 4 days. Yuan King couldn't accept the truth and loudly asked, "What about the superhuman realm?" Even Lai Dongzhi wasn't clear, but it could be longer. Yuan King thought that perhaps Lai Yibing had already reached the superhuman realm. Yuan King recognized that currently neither his abilities nor knowledge could help others at all. The most important thing was to join the organization and save himself. Before introducing him to the organization, Lai Dongzhi had one important thing he wanted to know: Yuan King's morality points. He reminded him that for beginners, morality value was the biggest trap, and he must remember this. Below 60 points would trigger the Spirit Realm's punishment mechanism. It would notify all Spirit Realm practitioners in the same city of his position and clearly announce his mission. Yuan King was shocked and asked if that meant he couldn't do anything bad for his entire life. In his heart, he was confused, thinking that his life was over. Lai Dongzhi laughed loudly, telling him not to worry. Based on observation, acts of theft, robbery, and causing injury to Spirit Realm practitioners would be handled according to the severity of the incident. It would deduct from 1 to 5 points and 10 points for murder. In cases causing serious consequences resulting in the deaths of many people, morality points would be deducted accordingly based on the incident. For some personal moral losses, there would be no impact on morality value. Furthermore, morality value wasn't just deducted, it could also be accumulated by being a good person. Yuan King listened while thinking about why the Spirit Realm wanted to regulate practitioners. Good morality and laws are things humans created to maintain order. In nature, other living beings don't need these things. In other words, unless the Spirit Realm's stance is human, the existence of moral values would be reasonable, but people define the spirit realm as a supernatural phenomenon. Lai Dongzhi didn't explain to him the reason why moral values existed. It was very likely that he didn't know clearly either, and it seemed that the government also didn't know much about this matter. Arriving at the organization, Lai Dongzhi went inside first, continuing to mention the morality point index. Accumulating morality points was as easy as losing them. One just needed to do good deeds. In reality, many spirit realm practitioners from evil organizations very much like doing charity and making donations. This was the fastest way to accumulate morality points. As long as they had enough money, they could kill people without having to be wary of anything. Lai Dongzhi stopped and looked at Yuan King, asking if it wasn't ironic. He would never know what kind of people those philanthropists were. And what was even more ironic was that human life could be measured by money. Reality was like that, and the spirit realm was the same. Additionally, killing among spirit realm practitioners wouldn't result in deducted morality points. Lai Dongzhi pressed the elevator button, and while waiting he talked about the government organization. The government organization they belonged to was called Manhwa, formed by 5 major forces, respectively: Bai Huahu, Bai Hu Bingzhang, Qi Hu Bang, Shu Shengong, and Zhong Ting. The 5 major forces represented 5 professions: wood demons, scouts, fire affairs, water ghosts, and earth monsters. Yuan King whispered that what kind of government organization was this? It sounded like a bunch of demons, ghosts, and monsters. Lai Dongzhi, not hearing what he said, continued to explain that besides the 5 Elements Alliance, there were also organizations backing the government, and when he had time, he would arrange to send him the documents. The 5 Elements Alliance was established nearly 20 years ago. Before that, all parties were independent and had inharmonious relationships. This was related to the 5 elements' mutual generation and restraint and the differences in habits between different professions. He took Bai Huahui as an example, saying they were a group of radical environmentalists and members of the Animal Association. He despised them, saying even God wasn't as unreasonable as they were. Every time he saw the sickly faces of those animal protectors, he couldn't help but want to kick them with his shoes. Lai Dongzhi went on to list more, mentioning real estate groups and others who cultivated bacteria. He said quite a lot, but Yuan King only absorbed that much, his eyes wide. Lai Dongzhi concluded that only the Baihu scouts like them were the wisest, calmest, and bravest, a perfect profession. Yuan King secretly thought, has this statement been agreed upon by the other 4 organizations? Lai Dongzhi continued to explain, asking if it sounded more and more like a game. Different profession statuses had different functions. He again used examples from other teams. Qi Hu Bang was aggressive, liked to use violence like berserkers. Shu Shengong had the ability to control water, so they were water mages. Bai Huahui could raise pet beasts and heal wounds, so they were pastors and summoners. And Zhong Ting had thick skin and flesh, typical tanks. Yuan Qing interrupted him, jokingly asking, so you scouts have golden eyes, right? Lai Dongzhi angrily replied that if he were a fire mage, he would have used a stick to smash Yuan Qing's dog head. After passing the superhuman stage, scouts would have extremely powerful individual combat abilities. This was called the perfect profession. Lai Dongzhi wasn't boasting. Of course, among orthodox professions, the Night Wanderer God was the strongest profession. Lai Dongzhi continued that the orthodox professions he mentioned didn't include evil professions. Even he, as a scout team leader, had to admit that the Night Wanderer God was more perfect than all others. Yuan Qing secretly thought that if the Night Wanderer God was so strong, could he fight 10 people? Yuan Qing curiously asked, Captain, can you tell me more about this Night Wanderer God profession? Lai Dongzhi was always willing to explain. At the early stage of the superhuman realm, the Night Wanderer God could exert extremely powerful assassination abilities, and their burst force was astonishingly powerful. Additionally, they had the ability to communicate with souls, control corpses and souls, had diverse skills, and formidable combat power. However, in reality, Night Wanderer gods were extremely few in number. Currently, in the Songhai City branch, there were no Night Wanderer gods because the number of Night Wanderer god trial spirit realms in Songhai was too few. Moreover, the capital continuously attracted Night Wanderer gods from all over the country. Lai Dongzhi, speaking with regret, secretly prayed for just one Night Wanderer god. At this point, he remembered that he didn't know Yuan Qing's profession and turned to ask, hoping it wasn't a fire mage as he didn't like young people who behaved rudely. Yuan Qing smiled bitterly, telling him it wasn't a fire mage. He was a Night Wanderer god. Lai Dongzhi, after hearing this, looked excitedly at Yuan Qing and asked again if he was a Night Wanderer god. After hearing the confirmation from Yuan Qing, he hugged him tightly and laughed loudly, saying that he had finally waited for the day to meet a Night Wanderer god. Lai Dongzhi, as if immersed in a glittering world, described how every Night Wanderer god was an extremely hot character. The spirit realm squads and even factions would fight each other to compete for Night Wanderer gods. Lai Dongzhi continued with stories from the surrounding community. He told about a young woman from Baihua who, in order to excavate a night wanderer god from Bang, didn't spare her beauty. Through bedroom methods, she made the other person change sides, willingly join the association, and become a servant of two families. Lai Dongzi still couldn't believe the truth, asking himself if he had really found a night wanderer god. He curiously asked what Yuan King's spirit realm ID was. Yuan King answered, Yuan Shu Tian Zun, which made Lai's eyes widen as he replied, "That's a good name." Yuan King, seeing his attitude, secretly wondered if he had to be so forced about it. Lai Dongzi didn't discuss this issue further and went to arrange the paperwork for him. He informed him that the monthly salary was 20,000, and there was overtime pay for missions outside. If he made achievements, there would also be performance bonuses, and he asked if Yuan King had any questions. Hearing the amount of money he would receive, Yuan King's eyes lit up brightly, and he repeatedly said, "Good boss." Passing by the common workroom, Lai Dongzi introduced it to Yuan King, saying it was for ordinary staff whose mission was to serve the spirit realm practitioners. In the future, if he needed anything regarding life or work, he just needed to contact them. Lai Dongzi pointed to an empty room that would be Yuan King's workplace. He asked Yuan King to stay there and wait while he went to prepare the documents. Guan Ye came in from outside, asking if there was anything she could help with. Lai Dongzi said she came at the right time, as he had just prepared the contract and asked her to transfer it to the new colleague. He had an urgent matter to report to his superiors. Guan Ye entered, smiling and saying it seemed like Yuan King had successfully completed the trial mission. Little boy who liked sister figures. Lai Dongzi helplessly told Yuan King to get used to her sense of humor. Before leaving, he reminded Guan Ye not to say strange things in front of the young student, emphasizing that he was still a child. Guan Ye chuckled and sat down beside Yuan King, saying she thought the college student would want to know more about the spirit realm trial. "Isn't that right, college student?" Yuan King shyly replied, "Yes, let's talk about that." Just at this moment, the image of Lai Dongzi walking outside the room reflected through the glass, looking very happy. Guan Ye curiously wondered why the team leader was walking as if he was flying. Ignoring him, Guan Ye handed the form to Yuan King, asking him to fill it out, then show his ID card or just read the number. She leaned back comfortably in her chair and asked if the team leader had already conducted basic training for him. However, there were some things she wanted to explain further. From today, his citizen ID card would no longer be used, and the organization would issue him a new ID card. Within the next 3 days, Lai Dongzi would give it to him. It could be used to buy train tickets, plane tickets, and use the Blue Rail line. There was also a card for beginners, which she would give him tomorrow. Yuan King asked with confusion, "Why do we have to do this?" Guan Ye explained that when he named himself, the spirit realm would remind him that he couldn't use his real name. The professions in the spirit realm were divided into 2 types. The first type was legal professions, meaning orthodox professions. The second type was evil professions. Spirit realm practitioners with evil professions would be violent and bloodthirsty or perverted and cruel, and all shared a desire to hunt orthodox profession practitioners. Therefore, revealing his identity was a very dangerous thing. Yuan King curiously asked if the names Guan Ye and Lai Dongzi weren't their real names. She didn't answer this question but asked him to guess for himself. She added that they were a government organization, and under normal circumstances, they would be the hunters while the evil professions would be the prey. Yuan King praised her, saying that Sister Guan Ye must be an excellent hunter. Guan Ye smiled brightly, moved closer, and complimented him, saying he spoke very cutely and asked if he already had a girlfriend. Hearing that the answer was no, Guan Ye was a bit surprised, exclaiming that his room was so clean she thought he already had a girlfriend. This image reminded him of his younger aunt. Did the two of them have some special hobby? Guan Ye wickedly smiled, took out her phone, and asked if he needed her to find an online girlfriend for him. Yuan King turned his face away and replied that he didn't need that. He only liked pursuing real girlfriends. Hearing his answer, she laughed even louder, saying she liked this kid, and to her surprise, Yuan King responded with a similar sentiment. Guan Ye reminded him to stop joking and return to the main topic. The entire Kangyang district had 10 Spirit Realm practitioner teams, and their team was the second, with 5 Spirit Realm practitioners. Currently, including him, there would be 6 people. Among the anonymous Spirit Realm practitioners, only team leader Lai and she belonged to Baihu Bingzhong. Guan Ye emphasized that he was recruited by the team leader, and once he became an official employee, he would also be a person of Baihu. She hoped he could remember this clearly. Hearing these words, Yuan King understood even more that the disagreements between the factions within the 5 Elements Alliance were deeper than he had imagined. Yuan King promised to follow Sister Guan Ye from now on. She laughed loudly, saying she really liked to interact with energetic young men. Seeing that Yuan King had finished filling in the information, she immediately picked it up to check. Reading the name Yuan Shu Tian Zun, she laughed loudly, praising its grand momentum but asking if he wasn't afraid of getting beaten up outside the gate. Next, when the profession line showing Night Wanderer God appeared, it made Guan Ye turn back in surprise to look at Yuan King, asking if he was really a Night Wanderer God. Yuan King smiled and replied, "Yes, it's me." Remembering the image of Lai Dongzi leaving like he was flying earlier, no wonder he had such a strange attitude. Guan Ye lifted his face and warned him that from now on he was the team's Night Wanderer God, so he wasn't allowed to run away with a girl from any other team. She emphasized that if he did, the person in trouble would be him. Yuan King chuckled and replied that he wouldn't dare. While alive, he was Guan Ye's person, and even in death, he would still be her person. Guan Ye praised him for being understanding and continued to look at the information on the paper. His current level was 0, which logically should be level 1 after passing the trial mission. Guan Ye saw that the trial mission was the Yuling Tunnel and fell into horror. She brought the paper closer to confirm how it could be that tunnel. To be more certain, she turned to ask Yuan King if his spirit realm was the Yuling Tunnel. Yuan King confirmed, secretly thinking that her expression didn't look good. Could it be that this dungeon really had issues? Yuan King smiled bitterly, saying he was about to ask for her opinion on the trial mission. He had confidence that if it was a dungeon, there must be a way to overcome it. Wang Qin, passing by the door and hearing the conversation between the two, could only sigh helplessly. Yuan King fearfully called out loudly, asking him not to sigh anymore. He was worried that this was sympathetic pity. Could it be that his luck was so bad that he had opened an unsuitable mystery box? Yuan King asked the two to wait a moment as he needed to find the team leader. Guan Ya, without saying anything, had already rushed outside to find someone, continuously muttering, "Oh no, this kid's luck is too miserable." Yuan King secretly thought, "Sister, please don't scare me like that." Wang Qin was calmer, just asking him to come to his desk. Judging from the attitudes of the two, he could guess that the Yuling Tunnel was indeed extremely difficult. After he left the dungeon, he had completed 20% of the main mission and also determined that the main hall was a safe house. Thinking this way, when encountering danger, he just needed to return to the main hall. Wang Qin consoled him, saying there was a strategy because details of each past spirit realm were recorded. This was the duty of each official practitioner, and the organization would also have corresponding rewards. But the Yuling Tunnel was a bit different. He should go see for himself. On Wang Qin's computer screen was an open document summarizing the Night Wanderer God's spirit realm trials. First was the ancient ruin of Wang Village with the mission to survive until dawn. The danger came from the ghosts of hanged souls in the village and the desolate land outside. To face the death demon demanding lives, the spirit realm traveler needed to turn himself upside down to avoid danger. However, those with weak powers could only rely on luck, but vengeful spirits from empty tombs would converge on the village at midnight. The first thing a spirit realm practitioner needed to do was to go to the general store to find incense and candles to light up, which would prevent the flesh-eating ghosts. Some other missions also seemed much simpler than the Yuling Tunnel. For instance, the Lingang Reservoir Level B required crossing the reservoir. When crossing, a water ghost would try to pull you down under the water. Don't resist, just hold your breath for 2 minutes, and the ghost would automatically leave. Yuan King thought that generally the survival rates in other trial spirit realms were very high. The lowest trial level was level A, while the Yuling Tunnel was level S. Regarding the difficulty of the first main mission, it seemed more similar to the ancient ruins of Wang Village rather than a level S dungeon. Yuan King continued to look for information about the Yuling Tunnel, but the difficulty was displayed as unknown, and the mission requirements were also unclear. The initial incident occurred during the tunnel's construction when a construction team accidentally entered a spirit realm. 12 people entered the spirit realm, but only 1 person survived. However, due to severe emotional distress, this person's mental state was not normal. After 36 hours, this person re-entered the spirit realm and died inside. A bright red line below appeared, noting that this spirit realm was extremely dangerous and there had never been a successful case of completing the Yuling Tunnel. Yuan King understood that this meant no one had lived to return. Lai Dongzi still didn't know about this and was leisurely smoking in his office. He thought about how the young captain appointed years ago was eager to make achievements and cultivate proteges. A Night Wanderer God with a clean background was like rain during a drought for him, coming at just the right time. Lai Dongzi thought that Yuan King coming to him was also at the right time. He was very satisfied with recruiting a Night Wanderer God, rejoicing in his heart that Baihu now had its own Night Wanderer God. The person on the other end of the line hearing the good news from Li Dongzi promised to have the organization recognize his great contribution. Lai Dongzi thought he could already see a bright future for Baihu. In the midst of this joy-filled atmosphere, Guan Ya kicked open the door from outside, loudly exclaiming that there was a huge problem. Lai Dongzi, enjoying the liquor in his hand, reminded Guan Ya that she was not being elegant at all. She directly informed him that the spirit realm Yuan King had entered was the Yuling Tunnel. The team leader, hearing this, spat out all the liquor in his mouth and held his head, crying out, "Oh God!" Before his eyes now was the desperate figure of Yuan King leaning on Wang Qin's chair. He scolded Guan Ya, calling her a foolish child who only knew how to play with mud, asking her to look at what good things she had done. Yuan King, having lost all his vitality and fallen into despair, asked the team leader if he could still be saved. Lai Dongzhe sat down in front of him and said that the Trial Spirit Realm was the first simplified single-mode dungeon for Spirit Realm practitioners, and the hardest part was right here. In single-mode dungeons, no one could help him. This was the Spirit Realm's test for him. This was also the price to pay for taking the power of the supernatural. Lai Dongzhi, looking at Yuan King's tear-filled face, promised to report this to higher authorities on his behalf. He hoped that the higher-ups would have information and strategies about the tunnel in the database. If not, then truly no one could save him. Lai Dongzhi asked Yuan King to first write down his previous experiences in the Yuling tunnel. Currently, he could go home to wait for news, and when there were results, he would immediately notify him. Lai Dongzhi asked Guan Ya to quickly take Yuan King home first as the car had arrived. Yuan King didn't rush into the car. He stopped and asked Guan Ye if this was the last time he would see her. He didn't expect his words to become reality. He was about to become a ghost. Guan Ye told him not to worry. She wouldn't remain celibate because of him, and then hurriedly pushed Yuan King into the car. Guan Ye encouraged him, saying the team leader would think of every way to save him, but she could only wish him good luck. They both said goodbye, hoping for a better outcome next time. Guan Ye recorded Yuan King's peripheral information. He was a Scorpio male with a star attribute, rigid personality. The last line noted a small observation: high possibility of being seduced by women from other organizations. After pasting this information into Team 2's personnel files, she turned to Wang Qin and asked if that kid had any hope of passing. Wang Qin honestly replied that although there might be information about the Yuling tunnel, it probably wouldn't help. If there had been real results, they would have arranged for Night Wanderer gods to pass through this spirit realm long ago. Anyway, an X-level trial would certainly have decent rewards. Wang Qin added that if he had enough tools, there might still be hope. Guan Ye refuted this, saying that these tools themselves were extremely valuable and rare. For a spirit realm practitioner at the superhuman stage to have even one protective tool was already quite good. Guan Ye regretted that if they had some tools for Yuan King, he might have a chance to pass this ordeal. But with the many different tool functions and their limited knowledge about the Yuling tunnel, they couldn't provide tools that wouldn't solve the problem. The end result could be losing both money and life. There were only two ways to obtain honorless tools. First, enter the spirit realm to search. Second, attack spirit realm practitioners in real life, also known as killing for treasure. Another condition was that only tools outside the item space could be stolen. They both knew neither option was realistic. If someone died inside the spirit realm, other tools would automatically be taken away by the spirit realm, truly too great a loss. Wang Qin stopped his operations on the computer and whispered that right after the Qingming Festival was when the Yuling tunnel opened each year. This kid was too unlucky. Hearing this, Guan Ye also sighed. Perhaps that was it. Lai Dongzhi spent most of his time finding external connections to ask about information on the Yuling tunnel. He reported to the deputy captain about the newly recruited Night Wanderer god, whose trial spirit realm was the Yuling tunnel. He apologized for being too surprised and led by habitual thinking. When he saw Yuan King return from the trial spirit realm, he had unconsciously thought that he had passed. Lai Dongzhi messaged that he knew Tai Yipei's database contained the most abundant and comprehensive information about the Yuling tunnel. Therefore, he wanted to ask the deputy captain to intervene. Lai Dongzhi continued to send messages saying that never abandoning teammates was Baihu's principle, and since Yuan King had joined the company, he couldn't easily give up. His final words expressed hope that the deputy captain could help. Lai Dongzhi was full of hope to keep Yuan King. Yuan King arrived home and was informed by his grandmother that his cousin had just arrived and was in the dining room. Seeing his lifeless appearance, the old woman worriedly asked why he looked like he had lost his soul after just going out for a bit. Seeing him sit down beside his cousin asked what business he had. Yuan King thought that yesterday's problem had been solved and his cousin couldn't solve the new problem. In the end, he chose to hide it. His cousin continued, asking if it was about Lai Yibing, as he had heard that Lai Dongzhi himself had come. This also meant that the case was not ordinary. Even his cousin couldn't help, let alone Yuan King. The Emerald returned from outside, bringing Yuan Jun anti-wrinkle and anti-aging products that his grandmother had insisted on buying. Yuan Jun grimaced, saying he didn't need these things. The old woman, hearing this, came out from the kitchen and shouted at the youngster that she would erase all the wrinkles on his face herself. She scolded him, saying that at 30 to 40 years old, he looked even more haggard than his father, and asked when he would find a partner. She encouraged Yuan Jun to try harder, saying she considered his father a failure in her upbringing. She still couldn't forget the incident last year when old Wang from a neighboring province came to visit and almost caused his grandfather to die for mistaking Yuan Jun for his father. When old Wang realized his mistake, he could only laugh loudly and praise Yuan Jun's stature as being distinctive. Yuan Jun still refused to use the products she gave him, saying he was currently handling a missing persons case and was very busy. Hearing that someone else had gone missing, Yuan King immediately asked his brother what had happened. Yuan Jun told him that 2 people had disappeared in the Yuling tunnel and still hadn't been found. Surveillance footage outside showed them entering the tunnel, but the footage inside didn't show them entering. After saying this, Yuan Jun carefully reminded Yuan King not to tell anyone as he had signed a confidentiality agreement. The old woman standing behind listening to the conversation then spoke up, asking if it was that haunted tunnel again. She complained about why they didn't block off the tunnel, as people disappeared every year. Jiang, standing beside her, agreed, saying it was very scary. Mother and daughter approached Yuan Jun, asking if he could say more, as the younger aunt was very interested in this matter. Yuan Jun helplessly asked his grandmother not to inquire further and told the younger aunt not to gossip. Yuan King sat silently, wondering if those 2 people had accidentally entered the mountain deity temple like him. He worried whether these 2 unlucky guys could survive the 3 hours. Yuan King smiled bitterly, feeling somewhat consoled that he wasn't the only unlucky one. Lai Dongzi had once told him that spirit realms always existed, and perhaps a large number of people who disappeared each year partly fell into spirit realms. He still didn't understand what kind of existence a spirit realm actually was. In the capital, someone called Elder Sun received an email from Fu Qingyang saying that his team had just recruited a night wanderer god whose trial spirit realm was the Yuling tunnel. The email was sent to ask the elder for some information related to the tunnel, and also hoped he could provide some suggestions. The old man, lying on a long chair under a large canopy, swung a paper fan in his hand and replied that the Qingming festival had just passed, and it was also time for the Yuling tunnel to open. As this time approached, quite a few people received Night Wanderer God character cards, but unfortunately, no one had ever passed the Yuling tunnel. He could provide documents, as his sect had abandoned the strategy of attacking the Yuling tunnel. Therefore, the security level of the information had been lowered. By the way, he wanted to tell Fu that this place was an S-level trial spirit realm, and along the way, there would be some occurrences that made things more difficult. It had long since escaped the category of trial spirit realm. Elder Sun's advice was to abandon that Night Wanderer God, as the person would certainly die, so there was no need to invest in him. Level trial spirit realms were the most difficult for beginners. The Yuling tunnel was even more bizarre than ordinary S-level spirit realms. Each S-level trial spirit realm would contain unusual things, which could be rare tools or some important information extremely valuable. To break through the Yuling tunnel spirit realm, Tai Yupei had specially dispatched a level 1 Night Wanderer god to be stationed there for a long time. Because beginner S-level trial spirit realms sometimes open for level 1 spirit realm practitioners. After waiting painfully for many months, 2 level 1 Night Wanderer gods successfully received the Yuling tunnel mission. As a result, 1 Night Wanderer god entered the spirit realm and disappeared without a trace. The other Night Wanderer god completed the first mission but died on the second. And importantly, these 2 Night Wanderer gods had protective tools. Since then, the elders of Tai Yupei had reassessed the Yuling tunnel and completely abandoned plans to break this spirit realm. The old man assessed that if someone could really go through the Yuling tunnel and obtain the information inside, it would be liberation for their Tai Yupei. Elder Sun announced that in a few days, the sect leader would summon all travelers to the capital for a meeting because there was something to announce. He further instructed his subordinate to prepare and summon everyone under his command. Yuan Qin looked at his younger aunt, who was engrossed in playing a horror game, and asked if she knew she was a pervert. Jiang replied that she was just playing a horror game. Why would that make her a pervert? According to her, horror games truly challenged human psychology and required serious research into the specific rules of bosses. One also had to explore the inner world of the characters, which was both healing and stimulating. Yuan Qing wondered if spirit realms could be compared to a game. Would there be any rules? He firmly believed that if he could find the rules, even if he was just an ordinary person who couldn't even tie up a chicken properly, he could pass this ordeal smoothly. The phone beside him rang. It was Guan Ye calling to tell him that the team leader had collected more detailed information and the email had been sent to him. She knew that young people would never check their emails on their own, so she called to inform him. Yuan Qing opened his computer to check, not forgetting to thank the 2 of them. He said he would wait to overcome this challenge successfully and would definitely invite them both to dinner. Guan Ye agreed, saying she would wait for him to invite her for a meal. After hanging up, Guan Ye dejectedly thought that even if Tai Yupei provided materials, what use could they be? Yuan Qing checked the missions in the email, which were sequentially 2 missions no different from his own. The letter clearly stated that the background of the spirit realm was not the Yuling tunnel, but an ancient temple from the Ming dynasty called Sandao Shan Goddess, According to the traveler's speculation, this goddess must have been a night wanderer god with a high status, and if possible, she couldn't simply be called a night wanderer god. For the time being, he wasn't sure whether the Ming dynasty really had such a beautiful goddess or if it was created by the spirit realm. For him, the mission to survive for 3 hours was relatively simple. Initially, after reading the notes, he encountered a vengeful spirit. His characteristic was continuously draining yang energy from living beings until the target died. Night Wanderer gods were naturally suppressive to spirit entities, so he eliminated it without too much effort. When he wanted to devour it, he encountered a major obstacle. He guessed this vengeful spirit was perhaps protected by the spirit realm. Anyone who read the notes would be cursed and entangled by the vengeful spirit until death. Any exorcism method would only be effective for a short time. Exorcising the vengeful spirit once would roughly provide about 15 minutes of safety. Notably, the general layout of the mountain temple included a main hall and 2 adjoining rear guards. Pay attention to the candle in the main hall, which is an extremely powerful tool with the ability to suppress evil energy and purify. Just hiding in the main hall would be safe. What needed to be known was that the candle would dispel fear from human hearts. The longer one bathed in candlelight, the less fear one would have. In such a dangerous spirit realm, fear was a fatal thing. Additionally, it couldn't be transferred or taken out of the spirit realm. The safe house was a double-edged sword because one couldn't stay there forever. The candle was like something in a game that forced players to advance the plot. After staying in the hall for half an hour, he suddenly heard cries for help coming from the rear courtyard. Mixed with that were horrific roars that didn't sound like animal noises at all. After hesitating, he decided to go to the rear courtyard to explore. Yuan King acknowledged that the main hall was indeed a safe place, which he had experienced personally. But he didn't expect the origin to be in the candle. Yuan King had thought the cause lay with the beautiful goddess. The cries for help came from the large banyan tree, but he didn't hear any roaring, and the eastern courtyard was truly terrifying. The practitioner reminded that the large banyan tree was very dangerous. Don't look back, absolutely don't look back. He expressed doubts in his heart. This banyan tree seemed to have consciousness, but he didn't know why it was calling for help. There were also terrifying roars whose source he couldn't find because of their appearance. His investigation was interrupted by a pair of red shoes. At first, they didn't attack but invited him to dance. To probe their psychology, he agreed. But he basically couldn't follow their steps. They were too messy and complex for someone without dance experience like him. This was an impossible request. He was certain that even experienced dancers couldn't remember those dance steps. Because of failing this requirement, the shoes had continuously hunted him down. Afterward, thanks to luck, he escaped into the main hall in time, but they had broken 2 of his ribs. He thought he had seen through their facade. They were an extremely terrifying tool. They had the ability to track, bypassing terrain and obstacles, and wouldn't stop until they achieved their goal. He emphasized that this was a type of rule tool. The adventurer found it hard to believe that a trial scene would have such rule tools. Finally, he understood why his teammate, despite bringing tools, was killed in the mountain deity temple. And he also understood why no one had ever passed this spirit realm. He found it ridiculous that people who could enter the Yuling tunnel were either level 1 night wanderer gods or ordinary people. How could they overcome everything? Returning to the mission, he had not yet found the cause of the temple's decline, and the secret of the 1,000-year rise and fall was still unknown. He hoped to complete the second main mission and bring back the truth for the organization. After reading the story recorded by the predecessor, Yuan King thought about the clues he knew. The vengeful spirit on his shoulder could be exorcised by candlelight, each time providing a safe period of 15 minutes. He began to question the facts he had received, such as why one shouldn't look back at the banyan tree. Were the red dancing shoes really just a tool? Yuan King sighed that rule tools sounded very high-end. Looking back, he confirmed that the construction team's predecessors had probably been trampled to death by the red shoes to the point their bones were shattered. Yuan King had been taught by one of his uncles and knew a bit about dance. But if even a level 1 night wanderer god couldn't handle it, how could a kid like him? Yuan King held his head, thinking about the dance steps. If his head was tense, he wouldn't remember anything. Yuan King decided to call back and ask Guan Ya what a rule tool was. She explained it to him in detail, using the example of the dancing shoes in the document, saying the corresponding possibility was quite high. If one could complete its invitation, one might gain control of this tool. Guan Yao concluded that for the type of thing that wants to collect rule tools, you just need to think it's possible. Don't see it as real. Yuan Qing didn't care about unnecessary information and asked if medicine could be brought in. She informed him that besides normal clothes, most real-world things couldn't be brought in, and medicine definitely had to be taken. After hearing this, Yuan Qing immediately thought of holding medicine in his mouth to enter the spirit realm. The spirit realm's startup countdown began. Yuan Qing was once again brought into the spirit realm. His method of holding medicine in his mouth had worked. Yuan Qing praised himself for being quick-witted. With this pill, it would help make the red dancing shoes test proceed more smoothly. Putting the medicine in his pocket, he began to observe his surroundings, which seemed eternally plunged in darkness. If the spirit realm was considered a game, then certain items would definitely provide information when touched. With this thought, he immediately put it into practice by touching the candle, and sure enough, information appeared. Eternal inextinguishable candle. This tool was left by the Sandow Shan goddess. It had the power to suppress evil and purify. Yuan King thought it was indeed true that information could only be obtained when touching. He hadn't dared to touch the candle throughout the main story, so he didn't know. Fortunately, he had read the documents. His next objective would be to explore the courtyard in the eastern forest and find potential dangers. Yuan King thought that his blue pill would be his trump card against the red shoes, but it wasn't a perfect solution. Currently, although he knew a lot of information, Yuan King was still afraid and didn't want to go outside at all. Yuan King regained his spirit and moved toward the door. He had already explored the compound, so this time he would go east. According to the rules, one could stay in the main hall indefinitely, but what awaited him was only death. Anyway, the more he delayed, the worse the situation would get and hope would gradually fade. Yuan King thought that whether he poked his head out or ducked in, he would die either way, but he would choose to go outside to seize the chance to live. Yuan King's footsteps echoed in the frighteningly quiet scene. Crossing the wide courtyard, Yuan King approached the banyan tree. According to the documents, this banyan tree was extremely dangerous, but in front of him now, it was just a large tree. Yuan King believed that checking the banyan tree would help advance the exploration progress. Surprisingly, near the banyan tree was an ancient well. Based on Yuan King's gaming experience, ancient wells in games were always creepy, so he found another way to go around. While avoiding it, Yuan King stepped on a dried corpse near the well. Yuan King reassured himself that he had seen many corpses by now and couldn't be scared anymore. He didn't rush to leave but stopped to look for clues on the corpse. The bones were well preserved. The body lay on the ground with the head facing the torso. In general, it could be deduced that before death, something had forcibly twisted it 180 degrees backward. Yuan King sat down beside the dried corpse, wondering what could have done this. A cold wind rushed from behind, calling out Yuan King, causing him to shudder. Yuan King calmly took out the mirror from his pocket and held it up to look behind him. What caught his eye was a female ghost dressed in white with long black hair, calling him to come over. Yuan King cursed twice, then ran frantically away from the well until he could no longer hear the calling. According to the documents, the Night Wanderer god had also come here and warned not to look back, but didn't specify why. He guessed that the female ghost's voice from the well was perhaps only for those who turned around, so if he returned later, he probably wouldn't face danger again. Yuan King sadly thought that he really wanted to go home now. Looking at the empty rooms around, he approached one and opened the door to examine it. A cold draft poured out from inside. Yuan King cautiously entered step by step. He picked up a water scoop, whispering, "Virgin boy's urine can exorcise evil." In his mind, he thought that although he had never dated a girlfriend, he surely couldn't be considered a virgin boy. Yuan King felt his hand trembling with anxiety and scolded it for trying to show off. He stood by the window, looking out at the dark scenery outside like ancient monks composing poetry. Mossy stones on the old road in the cold night, walking alone with an unsettled heart. Virgin boy's urine splashed on the ghost's face, but the ghost spirit still stands still. Originally tried virgin urine to exorcise evil, the result wasted so much thought. Turns out everything was in vain, not knowing where the truth is hidden. Yuan King finished reciting and gave himself a compliment, then smiled. Leaving the first room, Yuan King received nothing. He had searched everything inside, which was roughly just a type of tool to comfort one psychologically. The second room didn't have a closed door. He would see that inside was an armory. Yuan King was delighted to see quite a few weapons. Thinking again, there wasn't much difference. According to the notes, it was very normal for this temple to have an armory. What surprised Yuan King was a dried corpse inside. He once again sat down to reason about the nameless dried corpse. There were two reasons for the formation of dried corpses. The first was man-made, the other was naturally formed. Yuan King ruled out the first possibility, and as for the second case, it was mainly formed in arid areas like deserts. The conditions in the temple clearly couldn't meet these requirements. After examination, he found no fatal wounds on the body, and no bones were broken by attacks from the red dancing shoes. Yuan King checked the upper part and discovered two large, clear holes in the flesh of the neck. It felt like something had been bitten by the sharp teeth of a wild animal. Yuan King wondered what could have sucked a person dry. Just at this moment, the room next door made a sound. He carefully went to check. Inside the room were two corpses lying down. In the hand of one of them was a glowing yellow object. Yuan King couldn't clearly see if it was a drill bit or a Buddhist scepter. Yuan King remembered the image of the goddess's empty hand and wondered if this scepter was originally an item in the goddess's hand. The sound he had just heard came from a coffin. Inside, the silhouette of a Jiangshi, Chinese hopping vampire, was sitting up. Yuan King silently warned the Jiangshi that he was a very dangerous person. Thinking it was like other ghosts, Yuan King hurried back to the main hall, concerned that if it followed him, it wouldn't be good. Just at this time, the 15 minutes were up and the vengeful spirit found him, climbing onto Yuan King's shoulder and beginning to suck his yang energy. He inwardly cried, "It's back again. Why did 15 minutes pass so quickly?" He staggered along, carrying his heavy body slowly toward the main hall, not alert to what was behind him. The Jiangshi with glowing eyes followed Yuan King's figure as he passed outside the doorframe. Yuan King didn't sense the danger gradually approaching. Just like before, he carried the vengeful spirit on his shoulder, step by step advancing toward the main hall. He cried, "I want to go home. I miss my grandfather, grandmother, younger aunt, mother, and deceased father." The sound of wood breaking shattered the quiet atmosphere and Yuan King's inner cries. He turned back to look at the source of the sound, and the first thing he saw was the glowing eyes of the Jiangshi. It had just broken through the wooden wall in the room to chase Yuan King. He could only run as fast as possible forward, not thinking that this ghost would be so modern, completely different from the rigid Jiangshi movements in movies. It squatted down, observed Yuan King as its target, then with the momentum of a jump, sprang high and pursued him. Yuan King, while finding a way to escape, cursed, "Mother and father, are you really a Jiangshi? Jiangshi are supposed to hop, not run after people like this." Yuan King's shouts grew louder, asking what kind of Jiangshi it was, saying it was too much. Assessing the situation, an agile Jiangshi running behind him and he being chased by the Jiangshi carrying a vengeful spirit on his shoulder constantly sucking his yang energy. He cursed twice and stopped running as it was futile anyway. Yuan King grabbed the weapon in his hand and surprisingly took the initiative to attack the Jiangshi. During the attack, he discovered that the Jiangshi had no heart. Its heart had been dug out. This must be the eldest senior brother from the notebook. The eldest senior brother's screams echoed as he attacked Yuan King from afar with his infinitely long arms. Yuan King difficultly dodged and counterattacked, but the sword that pierced the opponent had no effect, like cutting into bronze skin and iron flesh. Taking advantage of Yuan King's surprise, the Jiangshi pushed him to the ground, again wanting to suck blood from him. Fortunately, Yuan King was quicker, taking out his corpse-controlling talisman. The Jiangshi was pushed away, and Yuan King was inwardly delighted it worked. It was avoiding him. At least it had some intelligence. The position was not far from the ancient well. Yuan King prayed that the sister ghost under the well would best not come out and cause trouble. Looking at the vengeful spirit on his shoulder, Yuan King also reminded it that they were all acquaintances, so suck yang energy slowly. Returning to face the Jiangshi, Yuan King played the role of a wizard, asking who was to block his way. Using the corpse-controlling talisman, Yuan King retreated step by step toward the main hall. Seeing the emitted light, he ran straight inside, exclaiming that he was saved. Yuan King had been poisoned during the fight with the Jiangshi. With his current condition, he couldn't prolong the time anymore, so he directly chose the second backup plan to subdue the red dancing shoes. He thought that if they were all tools and the yellow paper talisman could be used, then the red dancing shoes could also be used. Moreover, Sister Guanya had told him that there were rules to break rule-type tools with a chance to subdue them. Yuan King calculated that with his abilities, it would be too difficult to paste the yellow paper talisman on the Jiangshi's forehead himself. There was a high probability that just as he brought out the talisman before it could be deployed, he would already be chased without cease. Pasting a talisman on the forehead of a fierce, terrifying, and intelligent yin object was no different than a child holding a knife to attack an adult. Although adults fear the blade, it doesn't mean children can actually harm adults. Yuan King sighed at his difficult situation. He took out the blue pills he had prepared earlier from his pocket. Now he was poisoned by the Jiangshi. Whether he fought or gave up, there was a high chance he would lose his life. Yuan King whispered, "If I don't go to hell, who will?" He went out to the middle of the courtyard and called loudly for the red dancing shoes to come. They immediately appeared before his eyes. Yuan King silently cursed that they appeared right between him and the main hall, blocking his retreat path. A voice rang out asking if Yuan King would agree to dance one tune with them. If he agreed, he should stand still. Yuan King thought it was indeed a request to dance. If he didn't dance with them, they would certainly kill him. He inwardly cursed, "You evil thing." Then he silently prayed to enter his brain's overload mode. Each step of the red shoes was imprinted in Yuan King's memory until they stopped and reminded him that it was his turn. Yuan King began to perform the movements he had just learned and started dancing. He thought thankfully only the red shoes could see and they couldn't mock him. Otherwise, his magnificent image would be gone forever. After finishing the dance, Yuan King happily said he had missed a single step, while at the same time, quite a bit of blood flowed from his nose and mouth. He didn't expect the red shoes to criticize his dancing as too poor, but since he didn't make mistakes, they reluctantly accepted it. The system notified him that he had completed the dance with the red shoes and received their appreciation. However, because his dancing skills were too poor, they would only reward him for half an hour. Yuan King immediately took the pills he had prepared earlier and only then felt the sensation of being alive again. The red shoes information gradually appeared. Their owner was a princess from a western kingdom. She possessed natural gorgeous beauty and excelled at dancing, making all men in the kingdom infatuated with her. But because of her evil stepmother who envied her talent and beauty, she was imprisoned in a high tower. This made the lonely princess only dance by herself under the cold moonlight until she finally died. These red shoes carried her thoughts and began to wander, dancing without rest. The system displayed usage forms. Throw the dancing shoes at a designated target or through other connections, and they would pursue the target relentlessly. During the pursuit, they would bypass physical obstacles, not stopping until the target died or could complete a perfect dance with them. The second form of use, wearing the red dancing shoes, would enhance agility, improve dodging, and allow running on any terrain without consuming physical strength. The only condition was that they could only be worn for 5 minutes per time. Exceeding this time would mean being unable to take off the shoes and continuing to run until death or cutting off one's feet. Yuan King's eyes sparkled as he repeatedly called them divine weapons. They could bypass obstacles inside houses. They were absurdly powerful. Yuan King held his forehead, regretful that he was only rewarded for half an hour. Then he told himself that half an hour was already enough.